Palestine Action supporters were preparing for two things they thought likely: defeat in court and arrest outside it. But when the news filtered through, ripples of surprise, then jubilation.
Free, free! Palestine! Palestine Action is unbanned!
The judges had struck down the government's ban.
Were you expecting this, or were you preparing to be arrested today?
I was preparing to be arrested, because I thought it was a stitch-up, but I'm just overwhelmed.
It's a stand against government overreach in cracking down on people using their voices.
Well, a sense of almost unexpected celebration. There is also, though, an acceptance that this will go to appeal. That was going to be the case whichever side won. And we're also hearing from inside the court that the prescription of Palestine Action as a group will continue until the 20th of February.
The panel of three judges said Palestine Action had engaged in criminality and that some of its activities amounted to terrorism. But for that, the government had the criminal law available, and that such acts hadn't reached the level, scale and persistence to warrant prescription.
This is a vindication for the Palestinian people themselves, who called out to all of you and asked us to defend them. We did. Asked us to break the supply chain of Israeli weapons, and we did.
The Metropolitan Police said under the unusual circumstances of the prescription being ruled against but still in place, its officers would gather evidence rather than make arrests. The Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood said the government would appeal, that the ban had followed a rigorous evidence-based process and that it didn't prevent peaceful protest in support of the Palestinian cause. Palestine Action came to prominence with high-profile direct action on sites like the Royal Air Force Base at Brize Norton and the UK subsidiary of Israeli arms manufacturer Elbit Systems. After the group's banning in July last year, the act of publicly supporting it itself became a crime, liable to a jail sentence of up to 14 years. As well as nearly 3,000 arrests at demonstrations, there were dawn raids by police on members of affiliated groups. 23 activists remain on lengthy remand, some of them having spent weeks on hunger strike. Today's ruling unlikely yet to affect the thousands of supporters with criminal cases against them as the government carries out its appeal.
Well, we've seen for 2.5 years how the police have powers to prosecute activity that causes harassment towards the Jewish community, fear towards the Jewish community. You know, in court, Dame Victoria Sharp said today that a very small number of Palestine Action's activities amounted to acts of terrorism. Well, you know, how many acts of terrorism are required before an organisation can be deemed a terrorist organisation?
But the group's co-founder who brought today's court action rejects those accusations.
It's very dangerous to weaponise anti-Semitism and to accuse groups such as Palestine Action of that, for targeting the Israeli weapons industry for political reasons, for necessary reasons, to prevent war crimes taking place.
It all amounts to another blow to the authority of a government that's been reeling in recent weeks and now faces a protracted battle in the courts to prove its measure was not a disproportionate restriction of the right to protest.
Well, joining me now to discuss this is the barrister Jonathan Hall KC, who is the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation and state threats legislation. Thank you for joining us. Do you think the judges have got this wrong, and if so, why?
Well, I'm not going to say that. What I will say is I can see how the government's going to appeal. And I think the main ground on which the government is going to appeal is the point that's most interesting in this, which is, should effectively the police have been left to use normal criminal law, and so was it wrong for the government to invoke a whole load of sort of super law, which is terrorism law, really powerful, allows you to prosecute people for membership and fundraising? Was the Home Secretary wrong to invoke that, or should they have let the police carry on using general criminal law? I think that's really the core of the judgment, and I suspect that what the government will be saying, if it gets permission to appeal, is to say, well, this is really a sort of operational decision for the authorities, and it wasn't really one where the court should try and second guess. But, you know, the court has that function. I mean, ultimately, as I think everyone understands, it doesn't matter. Terrorism is very broad. The question is, what do you do about it? And what the court has said, bearing in mind the effect of calling people terrorists and the possible effects on protesters and journalists, etc., this was the wrong move.
Yes, so why wasn't the criminal law of trespass and criminal damage and assault and all those sorts of things enough to deal with what this group were doing in their direct action?
Well, I think what the argument would be is that terrorism law allows you to deal with an organisation, whereas normal criminal law doesn't. So, obviously, if someone carries out an attack and you can catch them there, that's fine, they can be prosecuted. If you can prove that two people are agreeing in advance, you could get them for conspiracy. But if you take something like fundraising, I mean, let's say Palestine Action had a very big website, it was receiving a lot of funds, it said those funds may have been used to fund attacks, what the court, I think everyone accepted, amounts to terrorism. It's quite hard to prove that that money was intended to be used for particular unlawful conduct. So what terrorism legislation allows you to do is to go for the organisations rather than just waiting until something's happened or try and find evidence of conspiracy.
But what wasn't the danger that the support of thousands of people and their preparedness to be arrested was undermining public confidence in the terrorism legislation, which is designed to catch very serious terrorist groups who most people agree should be banned?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think a lot of people do make that argument. I mean, the interesting thing in the judgment is that the court did look at the position of the so-called sign holders. So these are the 80-year-old men and women who hold signs saying, "I support Palestine Action." And they said, we don't really have much regard to them because they knew what they were doing and they were breaking the law deliberately. So it doesn't seem as if the court was so concerned about them. Rather, the court was concerned about the sort of general impact of knowing that terrorism law was floating around and so might have a sort of chilling effect. But you're right. I think that maybe some of the people who brought this claim and were supporting this claim may be a little bit disappointed the court didn't go further and sort of carve out some real principles. And I'm sure some people would have liked to see the court say something like, you could never call direct action people terrorists. You might prosecute them under normal law, but ever calling them terrorists is going far too far. The court didn't do that. What it did was it sort of looked quite closely at the detailed facts. It said, look, there have been these 3 attacks by Palestine Action. We think overall it would have been enough to use the criminal law, so it's disproportionate. I
mean, the problem also seems to be that using the criminal law has not been very effective, in that the most serious case brought to court so far, the jury didn't convict. So that there is a real danger of public confidence in the law around this group being very shaken.
Yeah, I mean, what you'll probably have picked up is that there are some people who advocate that you should have something below terrorism. So there are some people who say, look, what Palestine Action was doing was very bad. Its organisation was quite sophisticated. It was training. It had fundraising, as I've already mentioned. So you had to do something because normal laws weren't working, but terrorism was too high. So there are some people who argue that you should use sort of intermediary law, which you might call extremism. I mean, from my own perspective, I think that is a bit of a slippery slope. And if you can deal with something as terrorism, you should, because people have tried to define extremism and they've always failed. It's very, very difficult indeed. So, but there is a plausible argument that you need a sort of a different tier of law to deal with this sort of violent protest group that doesn't go as far as terrorism.
Jonathan Hall, thank you very much indeed for joining us.